Hello there, and welcome back to another Strategoi video. Ryan here with yet another tournament report. This will be our first one in the new year-long GHB, that being the five-game tournament, the first of the Threshold Invitational series that we expect to be happening here amongst the competitive scene in the Netherlands. And we kind of alluded to this one a good bit in our recent coverage of the Dutch team's debriefing. But here we're actually going to be talking about it. And with me today, I've got Nick Fry once again. Nick, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. What was your overall thought of this experience for the tournament? Just a quick, too long didn't read. How did you feel about this guy?
It was awesome. It was a really competitive environment, but still keeping the right atmosphere.
Yeah, I would agree. All right, so we're going to probably keep this one short and sweet, but it is obviously a five-game two-dayer, so that implies, of course, that we've got a lot of ground to cover with the games themselves. Before we get into it, though, everyone, thank you for watching. Just if you could, remember to hit the like, share, and subscribe, all the good YouTube stuff. We just recently passed the 2,000 subscribers mark, so thank you again for making that happen, and let's see if we can push our way to 3,000 as our next goal. All right, so taking a look at a summary of what we'll be talking about, we'll be doing a tournament review in general, a look at our two army lists and our matchups thereafter, and then concluding with just some results and thoughts about the overall thing. So, tournament review. Every time we kind of cover the basics, then the meta, and then the experience at large. So looking at the basics, the tournament itself was a five-game invitational. What does that mean? As we covered in the last interview, the idea with this series was to kind of give the Worlds team and more competitive players a forum for playing regular Worlds kind of level competition where we're, as you'll see in that last bullet point there, not really focused on sportsmanship or painting. Obviously, you're supposed to paint everything and you're supposed to be sportsmanly, but that's not really the point. And it's really only meant to be people that are bringing kind of cutthroat lists. And I can confirm that that was in fact the vibe at this tournament, as we'll get into shortly. It was supposed to be 20 players, but two dropped kind of last minute. Do you have any idea, Nick, who those two players were or why they dropped?
One of them was Mitchell de Boer, and I don't know the other one.
Okay, Mitchell was definitely on the Worlds team. Do you think he would have been playing Sylvaneth had he come?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
Either that or I think he might have mentioned OBR as well.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
But still, 18 players is solid enough. It's not that many players for a two-day tournament, that's for sure. Have you ever played in a two-dayer that's that few players, Nick?
No, never. This is the first time.
Yeah, usually, and that's kind of the idea of the tournament too, is that obviously if you're setting up especially a two-day tournament, you're needing the facilities and all that to be able to host that, and it's supposed to be a big event. Tom Mayhe's idea of doing this tournament was, look, we have kind of club nights that happen, not for the Worlds team per se, but then we often have Alliance Open events that would be happening at this, you could call it a swimming pool. It's more of a sports facility that has a swimming pool in it. From an American perspective, when I think of a swimming pool, I think of like a subdivision with like a gated swimming pool. That's not where we played. There were a number of halls inside, and we've had bigger tournaments. Do you know how many like players we've had at our biggest tournaments at the H2O Sports Center have been?
I want to say that it's like 20 to 30 is the max there, and I think that's primarily based on the amount of scenery and mats that they have. I think 10 is where they consistently have without having to bring more stuff in.
Are you talking about tables, 20 to 30 tables? Or are you talking about 20 to 30 players? Because we already had 20 players in the small room. We've definitely done the bigger room.
I think the biggest one is like 30, if I'm not mistaken. 30 players.
Yeah, maybe just north of that, so that it's a exponential multiple of 2 or something like 32. I don't know, but yeah, I think you're right. I don't think it's like a 64. Definitely not 64 players. But Tom hasn't been doing events there as much lately. I feel like he's trying to like use this because they've already got a lot of the tables and all the setup there ready to go for this many players. And I think that was kind of the idea: is instead of trying to put on a big show, just show up and play a competitive tournament and it's ready to go, and so your administrative costs are lower, right? So I think that's kind of the idea. Is there anything else you want to add in about the format of the tournament? It bears the name of your upcoming channel. Did you have any influence in the tournament itself?
Yeah, I don't know about influence, but I threw the name out in our group text of when we were trying to figure out what to call this thing. It's not actually like directly, I think, affiliated. It's just the same name, but it's Tom and Jeff like really running the tournament part of it.
Sure.
But it is the same namesake, yeah.
Okay. So obviously, as a 5-game tournament, we had 5 missions, and those missions were out of the new GHB. Tom had actually sent us the list of which missions we'd be playing before all the missions went, or I guess it went, he sent it concurrently with the leak, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
Now, Nick, I think you had gotten about something in the neighborhood of 6 games in before this. I had gotten 2 games in, and I think I had done every step forward and spring the trap. I had done some numbers 3 and 4 there with practice games with Kai leading into this, and I was playing cities going into it, so it wasn't with my own list. Had you played all 5 of these beforehand?
I hadn't played Spring the Trap.
Okay, and you were playing everything with OBR with your tournament list?
Yes, yeah.
Do you feel like those kind of practice games ahead of time gave you a leg up at all?
No, not really. Because I think it gave me some exposure, but I was still very new to OBR, so I was still learning how to make them successful in these different battle plans in general. So, I mean, it probably helped in the sense that when we were trying to figure out the rules together, my opponent and I could lead the discussion a little bit more, but I don't think it was such an upper hand because remember 6 and there's 5 battle plans. So I didn't really get too much practice on any one of these.
Sure. Okay, so the missions, I don't usually include this, but because the missions are so new, and honestly, I don't know the names of the missions except for a couple maybe, I wrote a short description here. So Geomantic Pulse is the one where they're all in a line, and then from Battle Round 2, the pulse moves across. Nick, do you have any quick thoughts on this? The channel hasn't really covered the missions yet at all for the GHB, so this could be a little teaser for that, but any thoughts on the pulse?
Yeah, this one has high steamroll potential if you can stick in the middle. I especially with our tournament, that this one sees the most 20-0s. So with armies that can really duke it out in the center and hold those, you're going to really steamroll your opponent on points. Yeah,
because for the people who don't know, from turn 1, you're not getting much. You're getting your battle tactic plus 1 point for holding an objective. But once that pulse starts rolling, especially in turns 3 and 4 when it's in the middle, you can max out at like 7-something points, I think. And so, like Nick's saying, if you really plan accordingly and you can kind of roll with it, or just have a shit ton of bodies that are always there anyway, then you're going to be getting max points, and it can be pretty brutal. I think of all the missions, this is the one that enables the most swinginess of points, but I could be wrong.
Yeah.
Okay, next is Collapse. This is 6 objectives where the losing player each round deletes 2. One thing that was interesting is I actually got totally steamrolled playing Starborn Seraphon for the first time. And we reported it as a 0-20 for me, and Tom came back like after we had reported and said, hey, that's not even mathematically possible on this, because once you're losing, you just start deleting all the objectives, and then at least by the last round, the winning player can't score any objectives. So I actually ended up getting 2 points on that. It was a 2-18 simply because of the mission. Nick, do you have any idea, any kind of comments on this mission?
Yeah, this one is interesting because it incentivizes not scoring full points. So we'll get into it with my games, but there was times where it's like, well, maybe this isn't the best time for a battle tactic, to be honest. And so it's really crafty in terms of Also, the upper hand and going second really helps, or because then you can really time how many points you need to get and so on and so forth. So yeah, it's a good one. I really enjoyed playing this one.
It seems like it's really interesting for a world setting too, because it's going to kind of force the games to be a little closer in points if you're trying to like keep on top of that being just behind. And so you're not going to be steamrolling people. And at Worlds, you kind of need those 20-0 sometimes to like make up for the rest of the people not having, you know, that advantage. How do you see this in relationship to Worlds type teams play? Do you think this can be a 20-0 mission, or do you like? I mean, obviously it wasn't my situation.
It shouldn't be a 20-0 if your opponent just starts deleting things. But there's different ways you can play this, right? So for slower armies, I would say that you're going to want to. The points are going to be pretty consistent up until those last rounds where it really doesn't matter. Because if you get too far ahead and you're slow, like for OBR for example, the odds of you getting back into the game and start scoring is very low. So you're going to struggle on objectives. Whereas teams with high mobility and can get to these different objectives, perhaps they don't really care, so they can start running away with the points a lot earlier. So by the time you start deleting, it doesn't really matter. Because remember, even if the points are tied, it's a roll-off. So objectives can still be deleted in general. So you kind of have to really play to the strength of your army and what they want to do, what they can do, and what your opponent can't. So that's why I think it's really interesting in how you would pair this one. And then going forward of like, do you really lean into a highly mobile army? Do you lean into an army that can just kind of hold the center and hope for the best? And then timing on scoring and things like that.
Yeah, so it's a can delete, not a must. So do you think there's a version of reality where you don't delete any, even though you can?
If you're down points?
Yeah, like you're down points and you choose not to delete any.
Yeah, absolutely. So like if you're one of those armies that's stuck in the far side, you're not gonna, and the only options to delete your own objectives because the other ones are already gone, then you're not gonna delete them. Right?
Yeah, so I'm thinking mainly if you have like 6 on table and none of them are deleted, like is there a version where you're just like, no, I'd rather have these options stay on the table, or I'd rather not.
That's how I played my first one. I didn't delete anything because I wanted the options there.
Yeah.
So, so that I wasn't getting it bottlenecked in a certain way.
Yeah.
For example, like when I rolled the one, I took the farthest one out that I knew I was never going to get to, but everything else, like up after that, I was like, I'm not deleting shit.
Fair. Yeah. Okay. Every step is forward. This is 4 objectives where, I think this is the one with the L-shaped deployment, right?
Yeah.
And then there are 2 missions that have a charge retreat dynamic. This is not the one that does, well, not charge retreat, charge or run is the other one. This is not that one that does mortal wounds. This is the one that either makes you count as more objectives, models on objectives, or no models on objectives. So I wrote that down as changing your body's count, essentially.
Yeah.
How do you feel about this one?
It's interesting. I don't like it for OBR, but it's still an okay one. I don't. The only thing that I think it makes it a little, it's how do I want to say this? So for the battle tactic where you need to retreat and charge different units, I think that's an interesting dynamic with this battle plan. But other than that, it's pretty flat for me. I don't really like this one too much in general. And then the deployment zones are a bit wonky for me, especially with like setting it up. So it's okay for me.
Yeah, one of the things I'll be covering when we finally do a battle plan coverage for the channel is I've started taking kind of stats on every one of the battle plans to show not only how big of the board your territory is. So like if you have 11-inch deployment zone, that one is the whole your side of the board, that's 25%, but also what percent of the battlefield you actually can set up in. And because of the way this one's shaped, it looks like your territory is huge, but your setup range is actually quite small because of how much the 9-inch restriction eats into your being able to use that full L shape. So I'm not crazy about this mission, partly for that as well. But I don't know about the charge and retreat thing. That didn't really come into play a whole lot, to be honest. But it could be a thing. Okay, spring the trap. So this is day 2. 3 objectives. I think this is where the outer 2, they're in a line, but the outer 2 are a little further apart. And then you've got the full middle is your, like kind of that middle section is your deployment zone. It's got the T3 units can do a pregame redeploy, if you want to call it that. It's a reset up if you want. Do you ever use that? Have you ever used it?
No, it's not very helpful in the castle build.
Right. And then like they can't come down to turn 2, so it's not like you can just put them down on turn 1, and then they have to come off the board edge. I still don't see myself needing this with my type of like super mobile army. It's like, why, Yeah. And I haven't. No one I've played against thus far. I guess it's been Kai both times has actually used it. I haven't used it either. So.
Yeah, so for armies that really are reliant on like auras and things, I wouldn't expect them to be using this too much. I would think that lists that have disposable units, so to speak, will use it as a threat piece, that it can come down. So you kind of have to be more cautious about your turn 1 or turn 2 movements.
Yeah.
So thinking about where those things will come in could be a good deterrent if you can afford to do it.
Yeah, and as Marco from Team Serbia has pointed out, if you have a list like he did for Worlds that was Beasts of Chaos, where he had the Incarnate in the list. The Incarnate was formerly the only thing that had to start on the board. Now he can pull the Incarnate off too, which is kind of funny. So you could do a full null deploy. And so that means some armies that don't have technically don't have access to a full null deploy, because they still have to have some amount of units on table. They might be able to range it now that they could in this mission, which opens up some interesting tactical stuff for some people.
Sure.
Although largely I feel that a null deploy is a trap, but anyway. Limited resources. So the last one was the 6 objectives where you're siphoning them off, and they're kind of in like weird like diagonal lines, where you can basically only stand on them, control them for 2 turns in a row. Now there is some interplay there where if your opponent comes on and then takes it, then you basically restart the clock for how long you can hold it, which could mean that it's not quite you get max 2 turns out of each objective. Technically that can be lengthened. Your thoughts on this one?
Yeah, it's another one that I'm not super crazy about, especially playing like a not highly mobile army. The intention typically with this one is to get as far into your opponent as possible to start ticking those ones, because you know that they're going to go back and forth, that you'll typically fight over the middle, while not touching your own as much as possible, so that you can always rely on that and fall back. But again, even that strategy, at least for like OBR, is quite difficult, because going forward and back is no easy thing. So yeah, it's a tricky one. I think it'll really cater to certain armies, and others will really struggle.
Right. Okay, let's move on to talking about the meta. So as I kind of alluded to, the player base is extremely competitive. In fact, I would say that this was the second most competitive tournament I've ever played at after Worlds. It's not that some of the other tournaments I've played at didn't have competitive players at them. Of course they did. It's that this had no fluff. Like there was like nothing here that I felt like was a gimme, as we kind of referenced with Worlds. Did you have a similar kind of vibe with this, Nick?
Yeah, so looking through the list, when you see the players, there's not a single one where you're like, all right, I'll be all right. It's every single one of them is going to be a pretty tough matchup.
Yeah, for sure. We had a number of...
At least in terms of skills, right? So
yeah.
The army list may be a favorable matchup, but the player is definitely always going to be a tough one.
Yeah, there was no one here that was doing it because like they want to show off their army, Right. Not that there's anything wrong with that. That's a great use for a tournament and to be social, but it wasn't that. I said it was literally comprised of the world's training team with a couple additional friends kind of thrown in that are of high caliber. What the next one's going to look like is kind of, I think, up to interpretation right now. Like it's anyone's guess except for the guys running it. Obviously, the top however many guys or ladies will get an auto invite, but then I don't exactly know how it works moving forward, but we'll see. That said, my guess is that it's never going to be random people. I don't know how Tom would filter this out, but I don't think it's going to be random like people who've never played at a tournament. I could be wrong, but I have a feeling it's going to have some kind of like implicit quality cap, so that it's not just first come first serve anyone, even if he doesn't know who they are. Like, that's why the first one was an invitational. Maybe that's going to be harder to kind of filter out. I don't know, but that's kind of the vibe we're trying to go for here, I think. So I have no clue, but I liked the vibe. It definitely is not the kind of thing where you're trying out a list. You know, did you get that sense as well? Like you're not bringing some wacky list to see how it does.
No, every list that was brought, I think each player that brought them had the confidence that they could go 5-0 with their list.
Exactly. I don't know if I actually thought I was going to go 5-0, but I thought I would do way better than I did. That's for sure. And then I also said that this tournament was very local, which might sound like it's just a local gaming club. That's not what I mean. Usually in this slot, on this slide, I put something to the effect of how international it is. And I just mean in this sense, it was extremely not international in the sense that everyone came from our competitive scene. It wasn't, even though Nick and I are American and Paul Poissy, for example, is French, it was these are normal faces that we see in our competitive scene all the time. This is not people driving over from Belgium, or anything like that. So as far as the meta, this is literally all 18 of the armies. So we had 4 Khorne players. Nick, what was I've kind of gathered a consensus that I think, but I want you to hear your perspective on this. People went into this expecting Khorne to be really strong, but what do you think the actual kind of like feedback is you've gotten about Khorne after this tournament?
So it's kind of a half and half situation. So from what I've heard, and I don't play Khorne, so I can't say this with absolute authority, but they struggle a little bit with battle tactics and the battle plan. So they're not really super favorable, and obviously magic is not a thing for them, but countering it, getting blood tithe, or ignoring it and getting blood tithe is very helpful. At least from my interaction with them, they were actually a tough army because of mortal wound output, and so that was something that OBR struggles with, is mortal wound. So I actually went up against Scarbrand and friends, so that became a difficult challenge for me. So I still think Khorne has play in this meta. I think they're still a very strong choice. Those, whatever they're called, the skull crushers, collectors, sellers, barterers, I don't know, they're very tough, hard to kill. But yeah, so I don't think that they're out. Like, I don't think it's a done and out sort of thing, even though that it is, quote unquote, a magic GHB.
Well, certainly, and we've talked about this both on the channel and just the two of us, that I actually think that being a non-magic army, you actually have more of an advantage than you would not in this meta, or not in this GHB. Like, if you changed all the rules and it was just a totally different GHB, I actually think the non-magic armies benefit more than the magic armies do from the current rule set, especially the primal dice. Do you get that feeling too?
Well, it's certainly leveling the playing field for me. So I, like, for example, when I play against Tzeentch, I actually have an opportunity potentially to shut something down. I'm not going to turn it all off, right? I just don't have the same amount of unbinds, but whereas there was no chance, I have a pretty significant chance to be able to turn off one of those 1 or 2 crucial ones. I think is really, which changed a lot. So it balanced it in a little bit, gave us a little bit of a leg up. I think that the truth is, like with every podcast you hear, the power is unbinding, not so much casting.
Yeah.
So being able, that's where I really think the shift comes from. And I've lost my train of thought, so I'm going to stop there. Okay.
All right. So, I mean, you can also see that kind of reflected in the meta here. 4 Khorne armies and 3 KO armies. Now, there were also 3 Sylvaneth, which, of course, has magic. But are you surprised to see 3 KO armies? Like, 2, I guess that's 7 out of the 10 first armies we're covering here are not magic armies. So I think that's probably saying something. Now, granted, my KO list was second worst, but one of the other KO lists was second best at the tournament, and then there was another one that was kind of in the middle. How are you feeling about KO in a competitive sense right now?
I still think they have some play. I think I haven't seen it to its full extent of, like, did they drop down in their performance based on battle tactics and plans? But overall, I still think they do what they did pretty well, because the shift, I don't think a lot of your scoring was too heavily dependent on the last GHB. So I think the play style of, playing for points, outmaneuvering your opponent is still a strong way to go. With the shift to lookouts, that can be a challenge, but I still think you have a lot of good options there. I think the difference between, like you said, the KO list here was melee versus shooting, and so different types of playstyle, I think, is where it's really going to come down to for at least that army.
Right. And the Sylvaneth players, just kind of looking at the results here, one of the Sylvaneth players took third place, and then we've got another sitting kind of in the middle and another one towards the bottom. So kind of a similar spread. What are you thinking about Sylvaneth?
Yeah, so I think the Tree Lord build will still be able to do what it did, but it will be dependent on the pilot. So who's actually playing the army. I think Alariel in shooting is a strong one right now based on what I saw from the tournament. It does struggle with staying power. So with your Kurnoths, once they get caught, if they get caught and dropped, like if you have an army that can really do that damage, you have a problem. But they're still able to get around the board. You have Alariel come in and slap it and running away. So I think they're still strong. I think, again, it'll come down to a matchup. So for me, when I play with OBR, I had zero fear of playing against sites. I was like, sure, let's do it. Durthu, fine, go for it, knock yourself out. But with shooting, I was like, shit, now I got to get over there. That was a problem for me.
Yeah, but that unit doesn't put that much shooting out, right?
It doesn't matter. Like, by the time I get there, like, they can, and then you have Alariel charge it and fly away. Okay. So like it can do it. Like okay. it hurts. I gotta land those saves.
Okay. All right, and then we had 2 each of Tzeentch, Seraphon, and Git. So we're talking about a magic heavy meta, but like no Lumineth at all here. And then Tzeentch and Seraphon obviously very much representing magic, but and Tzeentch took first place, by the way. That was Jeffrey's list, actually. And Seraphon, with Mike's list, took 4th place. So, and you took 5th, by the way, with OBR. Yep. So that we've already talked about the first 5 in passing. So, any thoughts about the Tzeentch Seraphon kind of dynamic of magic stuff, or that gets us still here? We had I don't remember what Rule's list was, but I know Kai's was largely Trolls plus Squigherd. Any thoughts on those?
I think Rule also did mostly Trolls and Stabas or something like that.
Okay.
I think unfortunately I didn't get to play Seraphon. I still haven't, so I haven't actually gotten to see what they do firsthand. But I think Tzeentch is still very strong in its control, and those Zangors on disc are scarier than ever with Hoarfrost and all of that going on. So I think Tzeentch is going to be very, very strong here. Yeah. Like I said before, we still have opportunity now as the non-magic people, if you will, to keep up in certain aspects with primal dice if we get them, so we have that opportunity. But playing a control deck with all this, like Tzeentch, I think is still a really strong option. And I mean, the results prove that. Yeah,
for sure. And then obviously you played OBR, and then Henry played Nurgle. So we're going to get into those lists a bit later. So let's move on to the experience here. So the atmosphere, super friendly, as everyone knows each other. And I have to really say, this is probably one of the best selling points for this tournament, for me, is because it was simultaneously extremely competitive, yet easily, if you had to do some kind of metric for relationship between competitiveness and friendliness, this one scored the highest I've ever seen. Like, I felt like what I said in this next point, it felt more like a club day. I really felt like we were all just hanging out, being friends, instead of like, you know some people, you don't know some people. Like, the vibe at the end of the tournament, everyone came up to me basically and gave me a hug and said goodbye. It was such a positive vibe. And then we went to, I think 10 out of 18 of us or so went to get some great ribs that night after day 1. And that also felt like Jeffrey was talking about building up team, kind of like a sense of companionship with the team. And I feel like this was a great start to that. Any feedback on that, Nick?
No, I completely agree with all of it. So like you said, everyone was very friendly, hanging out. I think and the overwhelming feedback was this was the greatest sort of atmosphere, and I learned so much from this tournament playing at this hyper competitive level. So I was really happy, and I was one of those people getting the feedback as well. That we got this sort of forum set up to do something like this. It was really, really great, and those ribs were incredible. So Tom, excellent pick. I think that's going to be a recurring thing for me when we play at the pool. Because those are too good to pass up on.
Nice. And yeah, I had actually said I wish we did this like maybe instead of training days. It's not feasible probably, but or at least in addition to. They're talking about doing it every 2 months. I'd rather see it every 6 weeks, honestly. Like I would rather do this than go abroad for this, that, or the other for up to a certain amount. This is great. It really scratched a nice itch.
Yeah.
Now, I personally, so I guess this kind of ties into personal experience, but I was in a weird headspace the whole time because I was sitting at kind of the height of my stress of trying to find a job. And honestly, my head just wasn't in the game. This has nothing to do with why I did so poorly. But I just... Like my vibe that time. I even started like applying to jobs like in between games on like for the first day. Like I was just not in the right headspace to be at a tournament. But the friendly stuff balanced it all out in the end. But in terms of my desire to play Warhammer, I wasn't. I was somewhere below 50% wanting to be there to be playing games. So it was a weird vibe because it couldn't have been a more positive environment. It just my headspace took over. So because for those that don't know, if I didn't find a job, I'd eventually either have to come up with a kind of plan B to staying here, which was not ideal, or go home back to the States, and give up on my dream of being here. So fortunately, all that has come to fruition, and I am, successfully, and I get to stay here. So no more worries, but it was definitely on my mind. Nick, if you want to talk about your headspace, feel free, but otherwise I've just written down here that you went 3-2, you were in 5th place, which is interesting that that's 5th place, 3-2. Yeah. We're not used to seeing that being so high, but of course it's only 18 people. And we almost had a position where no one went 5-0. Jeffrey pulled it out, but there was a point, I think after day 1 or something, where he was the only one that was still capable of getting it, which is kind of interesting. Yeah. And then I went 1-4. I finally pulled out a win in my last game. There were some close moments in my first game that could have gone the other way, but in general, I did not do well. I was right at the bottom there for the wooden spoon. Any other input here, Nick?
No, you got it.
Okay. All right. So Army List. Here we go. Dust and Bones by Nick. Let's see. So Nick, you're going to walk us through some stuff, but just in short, you've got the anti-magic faction. I'll cover what I can. The anti-magic faction with a 2+ spell ignore. How much did that really come into play in this tournament? Did you go up against, obviously Khorne, you didn't need it. Did you need it against, you played KO for the first 2 games, so you probably didn't need it much there either.
Nope. So I played Sylvaneth. That was about it for spells. Khorne, 2 KO, Sylvaneth. Who was my last game? Who am I forgetting?
Well, I got it.
Nurgle.
Yeah,
so not a whole lot of spells from Nurgle either.
Yeah. Okay. Does that make you question whether Null Myriad's the right way to go, or do you just need to test it more? Okay.
So for me, this was all about. Sorry about that. My Immortus card just arrived, so I didn't want to miss the package.
Oh, nice. Okay.
Yes.
Well, that's a good. We don't even have to do a count in there. That's a great way to tie us back in. So keep going. You were talking about whether Null Myriad really makes sense.
Yeah. I think it definitely makes sense because I didn't know the list going into it. Obviously, when you submit your list, so this could have been much different in a Magic dominant thing. Going up against Tzeentch and Seraphon, that would have been huge. And also, I was trying to play as if I was already prepping for teams. So, already putting me in a position for playing as the Anvil role in the roster. So, hyper defensive. I'd rather need it and not, or have it not need it versus not need it and have it. You know what I mean?
Sure. So we'll talk about some other details here in a minute, but just the little things that I can add to this real quick and then let you take it away. You what everyone can see here is quite an elite army that's built around this Bone Shaper Catacross sort buff pieces stuff, with one of each of a big block of the 5 wound dudes, like kind of mid-range elite guys you got. You could obviously go bigger with the Archai or whatever they're called, but I from what I gathered, you've really settled on definitely a Mortis Guard, and obviously you were playing Necropolis Stalkers at this one too. Then you've got a couple Death Riders and one block of Mortek Guard as kind of unconditional battle line in there. I know you told me that there's a battle tactic that's centered around Death Riders. Is that kind of like, do you always need 2, or can you get by with just 1 in a list, you think?
I think 1 is a risk, so I would always take 2. And then maybe good to mention here that the reason I'm playing certain things is because these are the models I had at the time. So I didn't actually want to play Stalkers. I wanted 2 blocks of a Mortis Guard, and I just didn't have them in time. So I've swapped this list around already since my previous games. But yeah, so for the battle tactic, yeah, I would much rather have 2 Cavalos, and then rather than just 1, because 1 you can just pop off, and then that shuts me down for a lot of things, actually. So having 2 Cavalos really makes the surround and destroy a lot easier than, hoping that a Mortis Guard are in the right position. And then if it's a battle edge, it's very hard to get them back into the game.
Sure.
So I think 2 is a requirement.
Yeah. So while we're on the topic of Immortus Guard and Necropolis Stalkers, I actually think both units are fantastic, but tell us why you really lean towards Immortus Guard instead of the Stalkers.
Yeah, so this is again for the Anvil style playing. So Stalkers are more or less easier to get through because I believe they're on a 4-up save base, whereas your Immortus Guard are on a 3. And then also on top of that, the Stalkers don't have a bodyguard rule. So parking my heroes behind them doesn't really do me a whole lot. So I much prefer to have this. And there's also a battle tactic that it requires the Immortus Guard, not Stalkers. So there's just there's more value that I'm getting than just the extra damage and 2 models with extra reach. So in total, I think the Immortus Guard can slap just as hard as a Stalker. They're significantly slower without that command ability to run and charge, but I think I get a lot more value out of them and also keep my castle intact. Whereas I found often my Stalkers will just kind of run off, and then I got to bring them back, and then it just throws my play off a little bit.
What do you think of the quadrec aspects, the 4 heads thing on the Stalkers? Is that just not worth it?
Yeah, it's definitely worth it. So like you get damage, right? But that's what I was kind of getting at, is I'll get extra damage, or I can get hit, whatever, or a +1 save. So they'll be, at best, I'm going to keep them at a 3-up.
Okay.
So that's all well and good, but that's going to do nothing to keep my heroes alive when we're kind of stuck in, right? So I can't park Catacross to pass off wounds, for example. I'm not going to get that fight twice. So in this, when we get to our matchups, if they whiff, that's kind of a problem. Whereas with Immortus, if I whiff, I can always go, I'll try it again. So I think for me, the Immortus Guard are the choice at the moment. I wouldn't go as far as to say that Stalkers are not worth it. I think that's just a different build, a different style that you're going to be running. And for me, I'm trying to build a tank. And to do that, I think Immortus Guard are the better choice.
Okay. So also talking about, like, because I just played your list last night, the updated version, and the 2 big changes, other than what you just discussed, that I remember are that you don't have 10 extra Mortek Guard in the list, but you do have an extra not Bone Daddy, that's Catacross, as I wrote here, his official name. No, the other Mortisan. So
Mason.
Yeah. So talk to us about why you swapped them out and how they did at this tournament.
Yeah, so I made a pretty big mistake thinking that Catacross counted for Null Myriad and also for giving it out. So, before we started playing the game, I was like, oh, shit, that doesn't work. So then my castle became very, very small, which thankfully didn't really matter for most of my games. But in the event that it would have, that would have been a real challenge. Then the Mortek and the Cavalos also were tying into my grand strategy, which was I need to keep one of them alive at the end of the game and at full strength. that's super easy to deny. So actually lost a few of my games because of that, just the grand strat. So I resolved to get rid of that and change the list a little bit to be more focused on the tank that I'm building, which is centered around my heroes and my Immortus Guard with Null Myriad. So shifting into that kind of made me a lot stronger. And then adding in another hero opens up the Null Myriad range. It also gives me access to the entire spell lore. Whereas with the Bone Shaper, I'm pretty limited to just one spell or two if I go second.
Yeah. Okay. You know what's interesting is in looking at the total bodies and models, this is actually the numbers I'm usually falling into in my type of armies. I tend to play elite as well, and so on the surface of it, you might say, Ryan, this seems like a Ryan army, but I do like that it's low models and that it's real compact. Obviously, it's tanky as hell, as I witnessed last night. Can you explain some of the tanky stuff for us in a second here? But I guess I should finish my line of thought. There's a part of me that thinks that just the play style of this is more Fire Slayers-esque, where it's kind of just this slow block moving up and like denying things once it gets there. I don't know if that's actually my play style. I need to actually play with my Fire Slayers at some point to figure out if that's my thing. But that's another question. So maybe tell us about the tanky stuff first, and then maybe weigh in on whether you think there's a version of this that would actually fit my playstyle.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so the tankiness is, like, again, focusing on the Immortus Guard, who are on a base 3 up. Then Catacross has a aura, which is 24 inches. Every model wholly within is going to get +1 save, +1 to hit. So that's putting your Immortus Guard on essentially a 2 up. Then, you have casting. So if you really want to make sure that you're going to get hit, you can put Mystic Shield on to put them at a 1 up. Or you could, just put them if you want that, or you could go a different spell to give them a 4 up ward against mortal wounds. So, or you give them both if you want to. So on that end, we're sitting at a 1 up potentially with a 4 up ward against mortal wounds. Then when we get into combat or shooting phase, you also have all out defense, because remember, if I'm going second, I'll have anywhere from 9 to 11 command points at my disposal. So all out defense on the Immortus Guard if I want to, and then that's going to put me at a 0 up. So, your -3 Ren puts me back to my base save, and then if you're doing impact hits or anything mortal wounds, I get a 4 up ward against that. So that becomes really, really aggressive. Then on top of that, if you opt to go for Catacross, for example, he's sitting on a 3 up minimum. Same kind of logic applies. He's getting +1 from himself. All out defense if he needs it, if I didn't use it somewhere else. And then he's passing off wounds from the bodyguard rule. So you've got a block of 30 wounds in the Immortus Guard and 20 for himself, and the pass is on a 2 up. And this applies to all heroes. So if you've got your Bone Shaper, your Mortisans, they're just passing off wounds. You're also getting the Lookout Sir bonus, so it's really hard to get through. And then so this slow just wall of shield and bone crushing towards you, it's very hard to lift off of objectives. And then you expect that maybe it doesn't hit as hard, but it absolutely does. So it's a brutal army.
Yeah, Catacross did quite a bit of damage. He took down my frigate by itself. Now, I didn't have all that defense on, and he had extra Ren going on. Where was he getting that Ren from again? Oh, it was from the
Command Legend, yeah.
Oh, it's insane. I think you said one of them was at -4.
Yeah, his first attack is -3 basic, and so with Legend it goes to -1. Yeah.
So yeah, okay, about whether or not you think this would actually, is there a version of OBR, maybe not your version, but is there any version of OBR that you actually think would match my playstyle from what you know of me?
Yeah, so I think there's some techie fun stuff that you can do in here. So, if you look at the crawlers, for example, you can be giving strike last with if you target, so you can really time all these buffs and strikes that you're looking for. It doesn't just have to be these. And you have an Immortus Guard for your backline wall or whatever it is, or holding objectives, but you could have stalkers running around going wild. You could be throwing crawlers in there, your Cavalos doing mortal wounds and piling in. So I think there is a lot of techie fun things that will build on itself. And piling in or adding in, for example, with the Bone Shaper's gear here, the Dark Acolyte auto casting if your spell is successful with Drain Vitality, putting your opponent at -1 to hit, -1 save. So you're really just debuffing them to hell. and you almost kind of have like a night haunty sort of feel
Yeah.
to it. And then you're a very thoughtful player, so with this laundry list of command abilities at your disposal that you can use multiple times and timing out what you want to do and how you want to do it, it's very precision striking, and I think you could have a lot of fun with it.
Yeah, it's interesting. If I had to pick a death army, it was always going to be OBR. I just don't like the other death armies, and one of the things that kind of leans piques my interest is the Morghast units. But you're not a big fan of the Morghast, are you?
No, they don't do it for me, especially with it's a large point investment in small model counts that you can't bring back. So they're 6 wounds apiece, where my Immortus are 5 wounds apiece. Yeah. And I get to bring the Immortus back in a lot of ways.
That's fair.
Whereas I can't do that with the Archai.
Yeah.
I mean, I do see their benefit of turning off command points. That's all well and good, but it for what it will cost me, it's not worth it, in my opinion.
So you mentioned the OSCR commands. Anyone that's been following my extremely long full book analysis of OBR as a case study, I can refer you back to that if you want to see more about this. But there are 7 specific OSCR commands, and you guys generate a boatload of CPs, so you're never really hurting for them. So this is 2 questions for you. One, how often in your actual games do you find yourself running out of CPs? And 2, are there, of the 7 OCR commands, what would you say your bottom 2 are, and what are your top 2?
Sure. So do I ever find myself running out of commands? Yes. I start to get towards the end of the line there when I go first, because I got to make that last for 2 turns.
Right.
And then so this ties in directly as to why, because my top 2, one of them is the movement. So being able to really get where I need to be, because we're relatively slow. So you spend that quite a bit on a lot of your units. I would say just in frequency of use, bludgeon is my number 2.
Yeah, the extra run.
And then the runner-up for that is the retreat and charge.
Okay.
That one has helped quite a bit.
What do you find yourself not using?
The hero and the other unit can fight. I don't think I've ever used that once.
Sure. Yeah, it's a dynamic GW is really trying to put built into a bunch of war scrolls as well. And I just don't see people using it. I get the purpose, but it's, where the hero fights first and then their accompanying unit gets to fight with them. What about that reactive charge, that gives them +1 to wound when they get charged?
Yeah. So Counter-Strike is a good one as well. I find myself using that one less and less depending on where we are in the game, because I want to save those CP for something else. Hit wounding on 3s is still great, right? So it's not the end of the world if I don't use it, but if I'm kind of I know I'm gonna have to do other things elsewhere, so I kind of conserve. And again, if I went first, I'm already probably pretty low on command points.
Yeah.
And then, so that one a little bit, I would put that in the middle. It's not too far on the lower end. That's more useful. I think the other one that I rarely get to use is the Reknit the Constructs.
Yeah, the healing one.
Healing after movement, because I've used the movement one so much.
Fair.
So, but that one is tied to a battle tactic. So if I need a battle tactic and I have the units to do it, then that's helpful. But what I often find is I don't have 3 units that need healing. So it's hard.
Yeah. Okay. Is there anything else you want to tell us about the list?
No, I think that's good.
Cool. I wanted to go into extra detail about OBR, and obviously with every tournament report we do with you, we'll get to pick your brain a little bit more. Since the channels accidentally ended up picking up an OBR, a small but loyal OBR fandom. We had a survey recently on YouTube, and the OBR crowd was actually way louder than I expected it to be. So looking for more input in the future. Okay, so let's move on to my list now. I've talked about a version of this list in a few different places. This was my 4th tournament using some variant of KO. The first was in the 2nd edition book for the last Dutch Masters in February, I believe. The second would have been our doubles tournament, and then I took where obviously at the doubles I was half of the melee list with you, and of course we won. Thanks for doing more than half the lifting on that. And then the most recent tournament report I did was the one in Sint Nicholas in Belgium, where I went 5th place out of 18 people, I think it was, with basically this list. Now, obviously, it got changed a bit with the new GHB and some points hikes. For example, the Admiral went up, so I had to drop one of my extra Admirals. I used to run 2. Which is handy for having the second boat, always having another source of CP receiving for the boat, the special boat teleporty things. And then I previously had, let's see, I replaced that Admiral with another Injure Master on foot, so that's why there's 3 in this list now. And then in the most recent version of this list, I had gone for super high drops and just like I had sharpshooters in there and like extra artifacts and stuff. But this is pulling it back down to a 2-drop list. So basically, the things that are changed, it's still Barg's Own for the charges and all that good stuff. Still Bloodthirsty for the reroll charges. It's very centric on getting those charges off and wiping units out. Very Ogre's Charge-esque, but with a lot of striking first. But the grand strategy, this is new. Rule the Skies. It's a KO grand strategy for... basically, one of my boats has to be alive at the end of the game, and I have to have made sure that there are no enemy flying behemoths. I have found in general that there just aren't that many flying behemoths going around. Nick, have you come across a bunch of them? Obviously, you played against Alariel, Kairos, if you played Zine, Shinny Time recently. Is there anything else that comes to mind as a flying behemoth? That you maybe that's in the meta, I guess, is what I mean.
What about like I can't think of the keywords. Is a Bloodthirster a behemoth?
The Bloodthirsters are, but they're not hard to take down. It's and Scarbrand is not flying, so
yeah,
that's relatively easy.
Yeah, maybe like Bellicor. I don't know if he's also a behemoth, but other than that,
Yep. And Archeon is the big one I think of as being a pain in the ass. Like that would be hard to bring down, but I can turn his ward off with the Celestial Burst Grenade in the shooting phase for 1 turn, so that would make a big difference. But generally speaking, I found that as long as you don't get tabled, that grand strategy is relatively easy to accomplish, because if they don't have a flying behemoth to begin with, then you're already halfway there. You just have to keep a boat alive, which of course is partly, you basically have to win. And as far as my code, which are the next 3 things here, it's the same stuff I've been using. Extra movement for the boats, once per turn 2d6 run, and a once per game 3d6 18-inch charge. I just mentioned the Celestial Burst Grenade. Command trait is the Cunning Fleet Master, where the as long as a boat within a specific range is outside of charge range for the opponent, at the end of their movement phase, you can make a normal move. I love that command trait, but I've recently had to give it up in making a new list. But this one still had it. Let's see. One of the Injure Masters had the hand-carved Nullstone icon, since I have no magic in this list. I find that that's actually really strong, because my Navigator also has an Unbind, and then this is the one that gives you the unlimited unbinds as long as they're successful. So with Primal Dice and stuff, I've actually found that this KO list can actually shut down magic pretty decently, despite the fact that it's not a magic-y list. The code writes there for mixing up the code and giving me extra CPs. The Navigator gives you some extra movement, or shutting, like doing some mortal wounds and reducing the movement of enemy units depending on how he does his quasi-magic thing. And then it was 2 boats worth of 6 Sky Wardens and 3 Engine Riggers that are my melee balloon guys, and then 2 frigates, one of which had Prudency Shoots so that a unit could step out if the boat dies. And it was 40 points under the max, so I was often getting my Bloodthirsty Triumph, 2 battle regiments for a total of 2 drops. Nick, did you ever get to play against a version of my melee boat list? I don't know that you did.
Not against you, no. Actually, yeah. You played one when I was doing Gits.
Oh yeah, that's right. But you took me out so fast that you didn't really get to see what it did.
It was the strike back when you piled into hoppers.
Yeah, that fight on death was brutal. I would have done that differently had I known, but as we've talked about, sometimes that's you need to see it once in person to know.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's the list. I after this tournament will probably put my melee attempts and ambitions down to sleep for quite a while. My current list that I'm running these days is becoming increasingly less melee, but originally the idea was I would swap out half the boat's worth of melee power for Thunderer stuff, but I keep slowly taking those elements out, unfortunately. But I'll talk about that in some other battle reports someday down the line. All right, so moving on to the matchups. Nick, we didn't have a single overlapping matchup, which is kind of surprising, right?
Yeah.
I feel like we've had that for sure, even though we've never played each other. We've had it for sure at different tournaments.
Yeah.
Let's just go through this quickly. We've already kind of alluded to it, but let's just do, we already talked about the missions in depth. Let's talk about just, you go first, I go for each round, and just give me a basic, like, not elevator pitch, but a little bit longer for each one of these guys.
Yeah, okay. So for my first round, I played a melee KO, and it was on the Pulse, which, as we mentioned before, is really favorable for me because I can just park my big tank in the center and soak up those points. We were both 1-drops. My opponent actually gave, I think took the turn actually, and tried to box me into my deployment. So he put a lot of his units right in my face in the hopes that, he would stop me for a turn. And didn't charge me or anything like that, so he didn't really do any damage. And then when it was my turn, I pretty much killed, I think it was upwards of 50% of his army, and then locked into the objectives, hunkered down, and then I was actually able to win the roll off, take the turn. I think that was the order, but the main next thing for me was I was able to wrap one of his boats so that everything inside of it died, and at that point he had nothing left, and it was a 20-0 pretty quickly. I think by turn 2 or 3 it was over. And
this was our buddy Hank, who's usually performing really well at tournaments. He did definitely perform way better than I did with a melee list. His list does other things, but is in principle very similar. I know he told us that day that there was something big that he kind of messed up. What was the big turning point? He said he could have totally played better on this. What would you?
Yeah. So he shouldn't have put his stuff in my face. Like it didn't serve him to do that. And so I get his logic before it was to try and pin me, but then there was gaps in between the lines, so I just walked past it. Or charged around it, for example. So it didn't really pan out the way that he had pictured it. So when we were talking about it in the wrap-up, I was like, there was no reason you needed to do that to me. If you held back and then, work for a counterplay and just play for points, because again, no incentive to get stuck in with me, you would have had, this game would have been different. You would have scored a lot more, and I don't think it would have been a 20-0. It would have been a different game. I don't think he would have had the firepower to lift my army off of the center. But he probably could have started scoring more and maybe, take it in the long run, because he absolutely would deny my grand strategy and things like that. So,
yeah. Okay.
And I think this goes without saying when we talk about these armies, is that the players are playing at a high level. So they could make some, tactical errors, but like every single person I played against is a good player. Even if they lose, they still are very strong opponents. 100%.
Hank has won a number of one-day tournaments. I think 3 or 4 one-day tournaments in the past year and a half or so. So he's definitely a good player. So my first game was against a recurring tournament buddy of mine, and we actually met at a tournament, Hugo. We've played 3 times at tournaments now, which is almost competing for the top place of how many times I've played a single person at a tournament. But he was playing another list that's very similar to what we've played before, Host Arcanum, which obviously is great for the Magic season, but does nothing against me right now in my KO build. Kairos, 6 Disco Goats, as Marco from Serbia likes to call them, the Enlightened on Disc, and a Gaunt Summoner with Hoarfrost, which, as you mentioned, makes those Disco Goats hit real hard. He usually was changing the to hit down from a 4 to a 2, and then he one turn put it on like the Horrors unit, which I think he gave them like Ren -3, which is ridiculous with the amount of attacks they have. So this is that game that could have gone the other way. It was just a matter of like double turn type situations. I didn't get the roll off for that, and it ended up being an 8-12 for me. He just had more board presence for the rolling geomantic pulse, and I think he had a better sense for how it played out. I hadn't played that mission yet, but yeah, it was definitely a fair game. Like it could have gone either way. People were like, "Oh, Ryan, you took a loss," and I was like, "Nah, like this could have gone either way." I feel like this is the kind of game you're looking for. It was definitely the most even balanced, I think, of all the games I played at the tournament. Okay, so Nick, you played KO. Was there something else you were going to say there?
No.
Okay.
I was going to make a joke. These are not the games you're looking for.
Oh, right. So you played KO again, and this is Mitchell Stahl, who was on one of your teammates from Worlds. He has a very different list from the Melee list that myself and Hank were playing. Tell us a little bit how this game played out.
Yeah. So this one was how you kind of would expect it to go in terms of playing for points. So we actually didn't get into combat until about turn 4. And I lost this game, I think, by 3 points. I think it was 3 points, yeah, which was just my grand strategy. So again, that's where that lesson learned came from, that this grand strategy is shit. And the reason, again, was he could not shoot through my shield. He as much as he tried with the debuffs that I was able to hand out like candy, he just wasn't able to get through them. And I was able to just hang on to my points, and with the battle tactics and the positioning of the battle plans, I was able to just keep going. And this was that game actually where he went first, and he tried to not get full points in the assuming that, you know, he would have the less amount. And then I kind of just looked at him and I went, I don't have to score a battle tactic if I don't want to. And then he went, oh shit. And then so I was like, it's not in my interest right now. I'll take that gamble for the minor that you know, it comes down to that. But it allowed us to then be tied on points, and then I actually won the roll off to delete an objective, and this is the one that I said I deleted the furthest one that I would never actually get to, so it didn't make a difference. And then we went from there. Okay, is that how it was a good game?
Is that how that works? Is you win the roll off, and then yeah, go for it.
It's whoever has the least amount of points can delete 2. If you're tied, you roll off, and the winner gets to delete 1.
Oh, okay. I'd misread it the first time I read it. Okay, cool. Yeah. Did you feel like the burning objectives played a big role in this game?
It could have. It didn't, because I was trying to be as conscientious about that as possible, because I had pushed, if we're looking at a basic rectangle, I had pushed to the top right for those objectives based on deployment. So I tried my best to make sure that I didn't get stuck there, and I tried to wheel myself back as fast as possible to kind of get to where I needed to be, just to tag those and then work my way back in. Okay. Hold kind of the center board.
Yeah, and as a point of reference, Mitchell took second place in the whole tournament, and evidently he went 6-0 at Worlds, so this guy knows what he's doing. He's definitely the resident KO player in the Netherlands, so definitely a hard game. Yeah. My match, actually, I never got to see the deleting of objectives, as I mentioned before, because I played against the Croak thing. And so he had Gotrek. This is the interesting. He was playing Starborn. This is Mike Vondenholm, who's a lovely guy. It was our first time ever getting to play against each other, but we've been friends for a while. He had kind of like everything I think you want in this list. He had 10 Saurus Guard to make sure that he was passing those wounds on, Croak, Aslan, the Astrolith, Giminids, and then Gotrek was in there, plus some other stuff. And I think he gave me the first turn. I picked to shoot and kill a unit. I turned off Gotrek's ward save and shot him down with just one of my units of Sky Wardens, which left all the rest of my shooting to do whatever I wanted. And then I went in and did the charge. And if I had lifted Croak, I think I could have won this game, but I didn't, and I had no idea how intense the amount of wounds was going to be based off that 15 Comet's Call points or whatever they're called, the CCP or whatever, Celestial Power Points, that's what it was, CPP, that he basically just deleted everything I had in one turn's worth of doing magic stuff, and I learned never to come within 12 inches of those nodes ever again. It's just insane. I had no idea it could be that bad. Now, if I had won, gotten the objective of killing Croak or whatever, I think it would have made a huge difference. But it just, So lesson learned. And this is the game where I got 2 extra points simply because he tabled me so hard that I was statistically able to, in retrospect, remove points, which of course he was generous about. Of course, this tournament is supposed to be amongst people trying to learn. So Tom had come to me afterwards and said, hey, you should have not lost this many points. I'll go talk to Mike and then we'll resolve it. So, but he ended up placing 4th in the tournament anyway, so he was fine, I think. Okay. Nurgle. So your last game of day 1 was against Henry, playing his. I didn't actually read this list ahead of time because my head was in such a weird headspace, and I never got the to do the pairings matrix that we were supposed to do. But he had all 3 of the Magath Lords.
Sure did.
Plus the flies, the set of 1 flies plus 2 units of or 3 units of 2. Tell me about that. It's an amazing list. It's probably my favorite list of this whole tournament. How did the 3 Magath Lords do? I don't think of them as like synergizing particularly, but tell me about how the game played out and how the list was.
Yeah, so this one was also very, very strong for me. So I kind of ripped through them pretty quickly. It was the Ren that I was able to put out and just chunk through them. I just had to, luck of the dice with the mortal wounds and their ward save, but my Cavalos riders I kind of sent on their own little journey to pick off the flies that were kind of hanging out by different objectives. So I split my forces and I put the bulk of my army into the Magath Lords and all that other stuff. So I made pretty good work of them, and then also just he hit me back quite hard, but I was able to just keep bringing things back to life ridiculously. So yeah, it was a good pairing for me. And then when we talk about the pairing matrix, this is one of those ones that I put as a favorable matchup on my end.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the Magath Lords, though, I guess you never even got to see what they did because you got them out. You killed them quickly enough, or?
Yeah, they didn't do a whole lot.
Yeah, I always think of them as being kind of like you want one. I wish they made a generic one so you could take you'd have a reason to kind of customize them or whatever, but they're all 3 unique characters riding those cool beasts that have vomit coming out of their mouths or whatever. I love the models. I think it's really cool that he went with this list. I just don't know how that plays, but obviously he went for a super elite army. It was, I think, 1 beast in Nurgle in addition to what you see here. So that's 11 models, pretty crazy. So obviously he could summon stuff too, but okay. My 3rd game was against Kai. It was basically a rematch from what we had done a couple days before his training. He had 9 Rock Guts in his Gitz army, 6 Fell Waters, a Slogoth, and then a giant block of Squig Herd. I did play this game better because I learned from the first game. We were playing on, again, that L-shaped deployment where charging gives you more bodies or whatever. I think that this was just overwhelmingly bad rolls, an overwhelmingly bad rolls game. Kai is always lovely to play against, and he was super sympathetic to how it was, playing out for me. But it was just not my day. I think this matchup is definitely still an uphill battle, especially with that Squig Herd. That Squig Herd coming back, as you know, but I actually managed to kill off a number of things. It was a matter of getting those points, and it was a 6-14 for me on this one. So, I was pretty much done for the day after this one. But Kai is so lovely that I can't really complain too much. Okay, your 4th game, first game of day 2, was against Morgan's Sylvaneth list. Tell us about that. You were referencing it a bit earlier.
Yeah, so this one was a tough one for me. We both were we're not redeploying, so it was the Spring the Trap deployment or battle plan. And for me, I think I made some mistakes in that I didn't get to the objectives where I needed to be early enough. I took my time kind of moving up the board, and that kind of cost me in the end when it came to battle tactics or objective control. The big defining moment was I charged in. I should have, based on maths, dropped all of his Kurnoth with my stalkers, but I whiffed real bad, and they were able to get away from me, which kind of let the game progress where it shouldn't have, because I actually got a double turn. So then in my turn I tried it again, then I cleared out all of his bows, but the other models that I wanted to get were already gone, so that was unfortunate. So I didn't get to do what I wanted in the tempo that I wanted, and I ended up losing that game by 2 points. But it was very fun. I always enjoyed playing against Morgan. We always gave each other a really, really good run for our money. And yeah, it showed, I think, a lot of potential for a different Sylvaneth build, which is exciting.
Right. Yeah. And so do you think the Battle Mage is still necessary on this? I guess for the teleport and then the charge?
For the points, I think it makes your charges almost, not even a thing. So it's like, yeah, I will get my charge. So I still think if you can afford it, it's worthwhile, especially if your whole shtick is staying in the back shooting, have Alariel charge in and then leave. It's pretty important to have.
Yeah, because I've been thinking of this with the, what's it called? The Tree Lord, the Durthu build, but I don't. She's on such a large base that there are certain sub-factions where she can't even do the teleport because, or what's it called? If you choose the wrong season, it makes the range only 6 inches, so she can't even do it.
Right.
So, and I guess my point is more that even with 9 inches, if you only have that, I don't remember which one he took, but even with 9 inches, if you're not right next to the tree, she might not get to do it very well. So you got to be real careful about those. Maybe he took the one with 12 inches. I don't know.
He did. Yeah,
okay.
He did. He made sure that he had plenty of room for that reason exactly. But then that kind of gets to my point is that if you're not nailing that charge, you're stuck.
Yeah.
You got a problem. You don't want your Alariel just parked out there. So I think in those cases, Battle Mage and the Hive are very important.
Sure. I'm curious how many times he got to bring her back if she ever died in this tournament, and then how that dynamic works. Because
I don't think I even touched her. I ignored her for the most part.
Gotcha. So my fourth game was Sylvaneth. This was Marvin Stahl, Martin's brother. It's our first time really getting to know each other. This was my favorite game of the tournament, I would say, in terms of I always love meeting someone new. I felt like it was an interactive game, and it just was one of these things where even though I was losing, it just was one of these kind of like. Sometimes I find that the first game of the second day, I feel refreshed in a way, and I'm just kind of going into it. I have a sense for where I sit in the tournament, and I can just kind of let go a little bit more. So it was just the right mix of things. But he was basically playing the Tree Lord build. I don't know if there was anything in particular that was super different. This mission was actually in my favor relative to what he could have done, because this was the mission where he couldn't have a corner. The territories didn't allow him a corner. He was stuck in the middle of the back end of the field. And so that was a lot easier for me to come up there and do the charge. I think I made a poor choice of exactly who to take out on that first turn, and I split my attacks a little bit too much. But had I gotten a little bit more done with my alpha, I think I would have won this game. It just didn't work out that way. I ended up pulling 5-15 at the end. There was some nice strategy going on. It could have gone either way, and he just ended up steamrolling by the end and getting the rest of those points. But I had a really good time on this one. So that leads us to our last game of the tournament. You were going up against Tomas's Korn. This is your first time playing against Tomas, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. And so this is Scarbrand with a Bloodthirster of Unfettered Fury. I hate how long those names are. It's not the Boomthirster, it's the Leadership Techie one. And then 6 Skull Crushers, which, if I'm not mistaken, these are the Mortals on 2+ save. Is that right? Or is that the Demons?
I'm not sure.
Okay, I'll double check. And then I know for a fact the 10 Skull Reapers were the Mortals. Tell us about this matchup.
Yeah, so this one was challenging more because of the battle plan. This was limited resources, and we hadn't really played this one that well or that often. So we actually made a mistake in how we were doing it, and then we realized it by close to the end of the game, and we just agreed to keep playing it wrong rather than change it up way late in the game and have it swing in a totally different direction. So we didn't actually play it correctly, which is a bummer, but at least we were both on the same page about it. I was able to lift the big tanky boys from him pretty easily, might be a strong word, but it really didn't take too much to get it done. The big thing that I struggled with was Scarbrand and turning off the I think it's the Bloodthirster that turns off command abilities or something like that. or wards, whatever it is. That pairing was a pretty big challenge. And then again, chewing through mortal wounds. And this was one of the reasons why I added Soul Mason, is I didn't actually have access to the 4-up ward against mortal wounds with the list that I took. So now that I have access to that, this kind of gives me a little bit more protection against lists like this that have high mortal wound output. So yeah, overall, it kind of went back and forth. I think we both, even though we played it wrong, we didn't really, or at least I didn't deploy as well as I should have, which led me to tagging these objectives and ticking the resources a little bit too early. So we both struggled with scoring and objectives pretty quickly, which in the end resulted in me winning by 1 point.
Okay, gotcha. So you got a 12-8 on that one.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I looked it up. The Skull Crushers are, in fact, the 2+ save Juggernaut riding mortals, not the demons that are on a 3-up. That's a tough unit.
This was the one. Yeah, it was. But when you put a Stalkers in and give them bludgeon and all that extra crap, it gets there.
Okay. And
-1 to their save, blood. So I think I got them on a -4 or something like that.
Okay. Yeah, it's insane. I mean, I've killed them before, but they're just not that easy, you know, especially if they can save stack.
If you put the Stalkers into the attack stance, so +1 damage, and then they've got bludgeon, and then you already get drained vitality on them, and then, you know, you're just stacking all of these things, then they're on like a 4 or 5-up save. And
right.
Okay.
So that's a question for you, though, is because you wanted to get rid of the Stalkers with that modularity. In this case, the modularity really helped you out. You still feel like taking the Immortus Guard outweighs that?
Well, so you can still do the same with the Immortus Guard. So if you're on the attack, let's say you have to make a choice of fighting twice or taking bludgeon, right? But let's just say, for example, I go with bludgeon. They're already on a Ren 2, so that goes up to Ren 3. And then if I also have drained vitality on the target, that's a -1 to your save. So we're essentially at Ren 4. So we're kind of in the same ballpark.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah.
All right, and my last game was against my buddy Rick Mormon. We haven't gotten to play against each other in a long time, so this was kind of a reunion, and I think we were kind of eyeing each other the whole time, seeing like, hey, are we going to end up playing against each other? He's been out of the tournament scene for a while. He just had a baby not too long ago. So this was a bit of a reunion game. He was playing a different version of what I was trying to say, Seraphon playing the dinos, or at least the Saurus, -1 damage from your output, which can be really brutal for my army. But of course, that doesn't apply to Croak. And I don't think Rick had this is another one of these situations where you really kind of need to see it to understand it, but what the alpha melee can do in the melee list. And I got off my 3d6 charge I needed after teleporting to be over by Croak, and ended up taking out Croak in turn 1. He rolled hot on his dice to get rid of him. It wasn't just me putting enough wounds on it, so it was a combo of the two. But I'd gotten rid of his bodyguard, and he kept in the game for a long time. This is the mission where we're burning stuff, of course. Or no, not burning stuff, where they can sap the energy out. But it just went in my favor, and I got a 15-5 at the end. It was really nice getting to play against Rick and kind of get that train going again. I still think Seraphon is really strong, and I ended up just mainly playing Caddy on this one, teleporting around, which is, I guess, what I'm starting to have to realize, even with the melee list, sometimes you got to do. Just staying out, because they were slow and they were kind of stuck in the middle, and I just kept teleporting to the edges and getting what I needed to, and, you know. That won me the game, I think. So overall, I didn't have a single game that was with anyone I don't enjoy playing with. It was a nice tournament, as we alluded to before. And I think you would probably say the same from what I know about you, your games. Is there anything else you want to add in about just kind of in general about these matchups?
No, I every single one of them, I learned something new about my army and how to play these battle plans. So it's all you can really ask for these is quality games that you can take something away from. So I got that every single one of them. For sure.
Okay, and then just moving on to the conclusion, the results, we didn't have prizes per se. We mentioned that the top 3 were Jeffrey, our team captain, with his Zine Charmy, Mitchell Stahl with his KO, and in second place, and third place was Morgan, right, with Sylvaneth. Nick took 5th place. I took 17th out of 18. I got the big thing, the takeaway for me here is the melee list can do decent work. Remember, I was at an 18-person tournament that was a more casually kind of tournament in Belgium, and I took 5th place. And then this one is second to last. So it really hinges on the meta. And playing against a competitive setting, it just could not hold its own. Even Hank's army, I don't know if his list was necessarily that many. I don't know if the list itself that much better than mine was, or even better, depends on how you frame it. I just think Hank's a way better player than I am, and he only went 2-3. So it is what it is. So maybe the melee list just doesn't have a place in this environment. How do you feel about OBR and your result and in this kind of competitive environment, Nick?
Yeah, really excited. So, I went 3-2, but my losses were very minimal. So lost by 3, lost by 2, which, again, going with the mindset that I want to be this anvil sort of list, I was very happy with that. It's also not the list that I wanted. So now that I do have the list that I wanted, playing that, I'm getting kind of the results that I actually wanted to see, and I'm having a lot of fun with that. I think it's got a lot of strong potential for the future. The only thing that I kind of have to brace for is any battle scroll changes or things like that.
That's fair.
Really excited about what I can do with it.
Yeah, and your future goals, I mean, I think we've talked a bit about what you've already swapped out for your stuff.
Yep.
And I think we've also kind of talked about what you see going forward with OBR in general, and just, you'll have some FEC in your future, but, you're going to stick with OBR for the long haul for a while, it sounds. I'm personally trying, like I said, a more Thunderers oriented build, 15 Thunders and Ironclad, 1-drop list now with 6 engine riggers and a frigate to help me still have some of that stuff, and then some 10 Arco on the ground. We're trying that list out. I'm getting a better feel for it, but I'm still not 100% sold. And then once the Cities book comes out, I'm probably going to be switching back to Cities for the at least immediate future. So we'll see how that plays out. I'd love to get some more games in with some of my other armies this year. I'm toying around with the possibility of doing Tzeentch if I don't do KO at the upcoming AOTC, the Alliance Open Team Championships, in September. But we'll have to see. That jury is still out. Anything else you want to throw in, Nick, before we go to the exit here?
Nope, I think you covered it.
Alrighty. So, as always, guys, thank you for watching and following along. This turned out to be longer than I thought it would be, but I think it gave us a good intro to what the Threshold Invitational is all about for future ones, and also kind of like talking some nitty-gritty about OBR, which I think is nice, and the missions. So, in the meantime, guys, feel free to like, share, and subscribe, all that good stuff, and we'll see you at the next one. Ryan out.